Hey everyone. I see a lot of my colleagues are on here. Thanks for joining us. We're going to get started in just a little bit, waiting for Ben to hop on. And then we'll start our second lunchtime art chat as part of the Artworks from Home series at W83 Gallery. So thanks for joining. I actually have a Ben Cowan piece. If any of you were at his opening back in the spring of 2017, he was really generous and handed out these pieces as part of his opening, and I still have mine. So I'm very happy to show it off today. Oh, yay! Heather still has hers too. That's awesome. Hold on to it. It's going to be worth a lot of money someday. Hi, Ben.
Hello.
How are you?
Doing well. How are you doing?
I'm good. Good to see you.
Yeah, you too.
I was actually while we were waiting, I actually was showing off my Ben Cowan piece
Awesome.
and remembering how fun your opening was and how generous you were to create these pieces to give out to
Yeah.
people. So thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome. It goes great with your shirt and your wall.
Yeah, I wore the shirt for you today actually because I
Oh,
wanted the
awesome.
motif, of your work, and so I thought this felt
Thanks.
appropriate. Um, but we've got some folks joining us. Thank you for being with us for this lunchtime chat with Ben Cowan and Ben Cowan. I always say Cowan, right? Is it Cowan?
Yeah.
I
Cowan.
always go
Yeah.
back and forth between Cohen and Cowan. But
Yeah.
Ben showed with us at the W83 Gallery in 2018, right? Spring of
Yeah.
2018. And yeah, he did a beautiful show called Gates. And I'm excited to talk to you more about what you've been up to. And especially since you've been sheltering in place, what that's been like and what you've been creating.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so what's going on? How's it going this week?
It's okay. Uh the I seem to be having like a good week and then a bad week. Bad
Yeah.
weeks are that bad is a very aggressive word, but I get kind of mopey and sad, and I yell at the kids more than I usually do.
Yeah.
But that's okay. I've been like talking to a few other people that go
Yeah.
through similar arcs, and it seems pretty normal. But
Hmm.
I'm managing to keep busy. So like we're staying with my in-laws here, so there's plenty of like yard work to do. So that's yesterday I was digging dirt and painting decks and stuff like that. So it's pretty fun.
Yeah.
So I actually haven't painted in a few days because I've been painting decks,
Yeah.
which
I
is
mean, that is
it's different.
painting. Different
Yeah,
kind of
no, it is.
painting.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I like so I right before all this happened, I had just joined the Scenic Artist Union
Uh-huh.
for TV and movies, and so I was doing a lot of big set paintings and like painting just doing a bunch of different things, but using a lot of thick, gooey materials and rolling it on and working in a crowd of people. And so I miss that. So
Yeah.
rolling paint on a deck was like a fun way to get back.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
That's cool. What's
but yeah,
the Scenic Artists Union? Is that what that's called?
yeah. The
Can you talk more
United,
about?
sure. It's USA 829. So the local 829. It's the union that encompasses most of the creative fields that work in the motion picture industry in New York City. So, so like the scenic artists are the ones that do all the painting. And it also includes the designers, costume people, the costume folks. I'm still learning all this. And if anybody's from that area is listening, I'm going to get this wrong because there's so many different crews of people involved. But I'm trying to think who else is in the 829. And it's like a lot of the visual creative stuff, but there's also like carpenters and construction people and electricians and all that stuff that are in different unions, but we all work together on the stages. So it's been great. I've been doing it like it'll be about 3 years. I've been doing it here and there. And then I finally worked up enough experience and made a portfolio to apply for the full-time union position. And I got in October, started working in November, and I got about 3 months of work in, and then now I'm done for a while. So it's interesting. So I miss it, but it's okay. My hands were starting to hurt a little bit, so I actually don't mind the time off, but looking forward to making some money again. That would be nice.
Well, that's awesome that you're in it. I mean, congratulations. That's cool.
Thanks.
And hopefully as we get back to whatever normal looks like, there'll be more opportunities to do that again. So, yeah. So, your work, I want to talk a little bit about your work. I love your work. I'm a big fan. And, you know, the exhibit you did with us was so fun because not only was it paintings, but you were so thoughtful in how they were framed, and even framing paintings and like old door frames and, you know, wood that you found. And so it just really, the whole show just had such a feel to it. And a lot of what you do is looking at exterior and interior and sort of exploring those spaces. I know that architecture plays a part into that, and both the natural, you know, sort of architecture of plants and things like that, but also the man-made architecture and that sort of interesting intersection. So I'd be curious, you know, you're sheltering in place in a different place right now, a place very different from New York City. And, you know, you and I have chatted a little bit about what that's been like and just how that is even, influencing you right now and thinking through environment and just the effect of that, you know, on you personally and also on how you're thinking about your art.
Right. It's a lot different. So like where we are now is more suburban and single family homes in a fairly spread out kind of woodedy area. I'm sort of obsessed with people's bushes, and so I've been for like the last 10 years, one of my practices, actually since I got an iPhone is when it started, is I obsessively photograph people's homes. And so I tend to, wherever I'm living, I've photographed a lot of stuff. I was actually just looking at my archives for Brooklyn, and I have over 1,200 pictures of houses in just the couple neighborhoods that I frequent. And then lots of gate pictures and stuff. I have about that much from Southeast Michigan when I used to live there before New York. And so one of my things that I do here is walk around and take pictures of people's houses and bushes. And I have a good friend, I don't know if he's on here, but a friend of mine, Pete Makala, describes me as a creeper. So I'm like aware of how it might look to have like a bearded hipster walking around a suburban neighborhood casing a place, but really I'm fascinated by how the decisions that people have for trimming their bushes and that kind of like the aesthetic that a untrained person, you know, like a non-designer person makes decisions trimming their bushes or placing things to decorate their home, and it kind of, in the same way that like a kid drawing is kind of beautiful and interesting, I think I get that same joy from looking at people's yards. But it's not like, oh, that like azalea bush is so beautiful right now. It's more like, oh, the way that they trim the edge of that bush up against the window is bizarre. I have to stop here and take a picture of that. And so, so that's what I get really excited about. Or just when there's like a series of bushes that are all trimmed differently in a row and they have a strange rhythm. Like I have this one photograph of I haven't painted it, but I have a photograph of one set of bushes. It goes 1, 2, 3, and then there's a window, and they get larger, and then the window, and it looks like a thought bubble. And it's like, I know that the person that put those bushes in and trimmed it was not planning to have that interpretation, but it's sort of this, like, I think about it as like a kind of Dadaist landscape where I'm like taking the ready-made of what someone's done and then just making the decision of framing it. And that's kind of been my practice for like the last 8 years or so is sort of collaging things together or taking things as they are that other people have already affected, and then just sort of placing it within a particular cropping and then doing it in a series. So whether that's like the stoop paintings I was making just before the gate paintings, and then that was really just like taking pictures of people's stoops and the plants that they were putting on the stoops, and then creating my own kind of interpersonal interpretation to that. The gate paintings are more of my own subconscious, I think, because I'm collaging multiple images together and kind of affecting their the spatial quality of them on purpose. But yeah, I'm definitely I get really excited about people's landscape decorations here. Does that answer your question? I don't want to talk too much about bushes.
No, it does. It's interesting because like when I think of suburbia, I think of people spending a lot of time on their landscape, on their lawns, and on their bushes, and whether intentionally or unintentionally, there's something that comes across from how they design it, right? So whether it's like unintentionally creating a thought bubble or intentionally spending thousands of dollars to make sure the hedge is like that height, and that look, right? So there's this interesting thing where it's, it is sort of a representation of them, right? It's like this external representation of who they are and what they care about. I was actually thinking when you were talking about bushes, remember Edward Scissorhands?
Oh yeah.
And how he was like, that's what I was like imagining. Like you probably haven't seen anything crazy like that, but yeah.
My father-in-law let me trim a bush into a heart. So I have been doing that.
That's really funny.
Like I've been trying to, I don't think these are very good yet, but I've been like painting a couple of things like that. I just thought that was interesting. And then like, those don't have these aren't resonating yet for me, but I don't know. So that's kind of what I've been doing with the bushes, is just painting them on paper.
That's cool. Have you, so obviously like what you're seeing around you is, sort of affecting how you're thinking about, what you're looking at, how you're capturing that. But in terms of your actual process, have you noticed any changes this current situation or where you are right now? Has there been an effect on your actual painting process or technique?
I've been letting the paint get thicker. And that's been happening over the last like 6 months or so, maybe a year. So it's not directly in relationship to our current pandemic experience. But that is something that's kind of moving in to the work.
Yeah.
I feel like my process develops really slowly, and we've only been doing this for like 2 months. And in the time span of my studio, that it usually takes like a year or two for something to affect me. But I think psychologically, this will definitely have some sort of an effect.
Yeah.
I've been thinking a lot about essentialism, or like what is essential. And like, I think even for artists in general, like we're always asking ourselves the question of what's the most important thing about what I'm doing, or what can I eliminate to pare down or concentrate the experience for the viewer, and to have your entire life impacted by limits from whatever, social limits, or from the government, or whatever. Like, I've been thinking about what's essential in my own life and other people's lives, and how do we, we're not quite at the base level survival. I'm living fairly comfortably right now, thankfully. And I realize that I'm in a position of privilege to have enough space to like have my own bedroom and things like that. And so I'm not too worried about surviving, but even like, I was thinking, I miss my plants a lot, and I miss my paintings at home from my friends. And, like, I miss looking at the light on brick buildings. And so there's like some things that I just find myself daydreaming about that I don't have where we are now.
Right.
We have plenty of meat and beer. So like that part's been good. Yeah, definitely. So I'm trying to keep the vegetable intake up high.
Good.
For other essential reasons. But I know that was a question I had. I was thinking about to ask you too, is like, what sort of essential things have either been reinforced, or have you found yourself longing for or thinking about, either in your own like personal life or artistic essentials?
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
That's a great question. I was actually just talking about this idea of necessity with Evan Holter, who's the artist that's exhibiting with us right now. And obviously with the building being closed, we can't show his work in person. So we've shifted to doing a virtual exhibition, which has been a lot of fun. But it's definitely not the same, right, as being like in person and interacting with something like
definitely
physically. So, but he and I were talking a little bit about that. And I think for me, it's definitely raised a lot of questions of what is necessary, and how we define that, right? And so, we're starting to find maybe we don't need as many meetings at work as we think we do, right? There's that aspect.
Right.
And the things that I used to fill my time up with, was it really that necessary? Were all these events and things I was going to, how important were they? And how am I without going to those things? But I do think this, what this has probably reinforced this, and this particular, the particular conditions that COVID-19 brings up in terms of that physical distancing, the necessity of human contact and the necessity of being present with people, I think is more apparent than ever, and just having friends who've lost loved ones and the inability to physically mourn with them and to be with them, like that's probably one of the hardest things. And I think just even not being able to see as many people, not being able to see your family who, you don't want to risk going there and, infecting them or anything like that. Like, so I think that kind of, that humanity, is more apparent. Like that, it sounds cheesy, but at the end of the day, it's like, oh, this is what actually matters. Like the people, the relationship, like that is really what matters when you strip everything else away and you can't do anything else. But it's
definitely.
also been interesting, so it's also been interesting to think about that from like the perspective of what we do with events, and creating experiences for people. Like you can only do so much virtually. And I think everyone's getting to that point where you're having a little bit of a screen burnout. And it's like there's too many video events I'm attending. But the FOMO thing is interesting too, because in New York, right, like there's always this fear of missing out. And what this current condition allows us is like, I can go to 10 different events on the same night if I want, and just jump in on Zoom. I could even turn my video off and be in my pajamas or be washing dishes and nobody knows. And I can jump in on that event, stay for 30 minutes, and then go to something else without spending an hour on the subway. So there's certain things like that that's interesting. Like, is it ideal? I don't know. After this is all over and we can meet again in person, are we going to retain some of this? Like, what are the positive parts of that? And what are the things about that that's actually not healthy and not good and is going to only breed further sort of, disconnection, right? Those are things that I think will be interesting to wrestle with in the coming months.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
That's the hearing you talk about that reminds me of when my last year of undergrad in Chicago, I got a studio apartment, and it was the first time I'd ever lived alone, and I spent a lot of time alone because I was pretty far away from the central area of the school, so I didn't know anybody in the neighborhood that I lived in, and I don't think that I had personal contact with somebody for like several weeks. And I
Mm.
remember sitting next to somebody on the train and sort of purposefully, that I wasn't man spreading, but like somebody's leg was like against mine. And
Right.
instead of pulling away, I just let them lean their leg against me.
Uh-huh. Yep.
And I remember having this clear sensation of realizing how soft another human being was.
Yeah.
And it was such a surprise because I hadn't touched anybody in a certain amount of time that I just sort of thought everybody was hard.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
But like that fleshy feeling. So yeah, I get that. It's interesting. I have a lot of single friends. I have a lot of parent friends. And the
Right.
parent friends, we're all incredibly overwhelmed by having our children around all the time. And then all of our single friends are desperate for social
Yeah.
interaction.
Yeah.
And so like I just finished a book called The Stranger in the Woods. It's the story of the last living hermit or something like that. And it was a fantastic read. I really enjoyed it. But I started plotting out a spot in the backyard where you can't see the house, where maybe I could go spend a couple days by myself. So it's like this, like in some ways, I'm looking for a further social isolation than what we already have, just
Right.
because I'm spending so much time with my kids.
Right. Right.
But
Yeah.
for better or for worse. But yeah, I recognize that like there's like some good friends that I really miss seeing and interacting with, because the video isn't satisfying and just phone calls aren't as satisfying, or text messages or whatever. And
Yeah.
I miss eating with other people. I think that's probably the one of the big things that I miss,
Yes. I miss
is
that
that
too.
kind of shared experience.
Yeah.
So yeah, and like nibbling on other people's plates and stuff. But,
I miss them.
so
Yeah, I
yeah.
miss that social aspect. 'Cause even if you try to do a virtual dinner, right, it's like not the same. It is. I
Right.
think this experience is making me think a lot about this idea of presence, and just the presence we have with one another, the presence we have even with art, right? And a lot of my friends are musicians, and they're having to do all these virtual concerts, and they just keep telling me it's not the same. It's not the same. It's not the same as like when the audience is responding in real time, like live to what you're
Mm-hmm.
doing. You don't have that energy right now. You don't have that kind of sense. And a little clapping emoji on the screen is not the same as actually clapping and like hearing that, and even like clapping with other people, right? So there's that kind of energy, I think, in terms of like artist and audience. But then also just even thinking about like, yeah, like being present with people. Like what does it look like to try, like on a video call, how can I convey a real sense of being present? And I like staring at you the whole time without blinking is creepy.
Yeah.
But like it's hard to like convey the sense of presence and really being there, and especially if you're trying to comfort someone who's going through something hard. It's not like you can't hug through the screen. It's just not the same. So I think those are things that have really kind of come to the surface for me. Um,
Yeah.
I actually would also, I'm curious about this idea of like limitations. And so, obviously with everything that's going on, we're limited in a lot of ways. And I think for a lot of artists too, like opportunities have become very limited. Ability to connect with people with their art. There's definitely opportunities, but there's also a lot of limitations. And so just this idea of what does it look like to live with these limitations right now, and to think and to create and to process all of that, if that makes sense. Like how are
Mm-hmm.
you sort of existing in this like space of limitations?
Yeah. I think like I think it goes back to that idea of what's essential in the artwork.
Yeah.
And in some ways it's like this moment is just pinpointing a feeling that I've been having for the last year or so of like wanting to make the work more for myself and less for others. And I think, you know, what I've found is that making paintings is essential for me, because I'm a monster if I don't. And so that thing is something that I've always tried to dig into is to understand myself and my world. I have to paint, and so by painting, I understand myself, and and I feel like I'm continuously changing, so I have to continuously be painting. And here I'm repeating the question that you had just asked me in my head. It's
That's
about
okay.
having like limited availability and stuff, and so yeah, I had a couple of opportunities that were supposed to happen this spring and summer that I'm really disappointed aren't going to happen. And so dealing with that kind of disappointment
Yeah.
is a big bummer. But at the same time, I've been living a life of continuous disappointments for 15 years or more. You know, I think anybody that tries to do something outside of the norm can appreciate that feeling. And my life is full of successes, but there's a lot of things that have also been disappointing. And
Sure.
so in a way, this is just another part of that, but it's such a confrontational moment because there's nothing to really distract you from it except
Yeah.
for meat and beer. And so I think, you know, after the mood swing, I usually get back into the studio corner that I have here and sort of re-engage with what's exciting about the painting and start to push myself again back into trying to discover the magic that I'm looking for.
Yeah.
And it's that place of mystery and intangibility that I get lost in that I, you know, I find that to be the most essential part of it. And I think you can reach that with any number of materials or limitations. And yeah, does that answer your question? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Do you feel
Okay.
like do you find yourself leaning towards taking more risks or less risks?
At this point, less risks. I don't have as much material and space as I do back in my normal studio.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but also I know that like nobody's going to come here and look at anything. So I think in some ways I'm trying some new stuff that
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm just not sure about. I think in some ways that's always a part of my process is trying new ideas and just seeing what carries my interest.
Yeah.
And sometimes an idea just burns out. You know, I always have ideas that just sort of melt back into the background, that
Yeah.
may become a project in a year or two, but often they don't, just because I don't have enough time or they
Right.
don't seem important. I don't know. One thing I've been thinking about a lot is um, my favorite artists are all these like reclusive, weirdos. So like Vuillard lived with his mom and sister. I don't think he was ever married. Morandi is another one of my favorites that lived in his sister's attic his entire life and just painted bottles. And then I've been thinking a lot about Albert York recently, who's another kind of recluse painter, and Robert Kollrich. Am I saying that right? He was a famous framer, but makes these really beautiful paintings of flowers. And I've been thinking about him a lot. I keep finding him on Instagram, and I was talking to my friend Zorwar about him. And these guys just don't seem like they're painting for anyone but themselves, and I really kind of admire that. And so I'm trying to find a place where I can make paintings that really satisfy all of my urges and are sort of free from that self-conscious judgment that I sort of pretend someone else is looking at my work or something while I'm making it, and it
Yeah.
doesn't help.
Yeah.
So in some ways, I think being isolated so much is helpful to kind of tap that reclusive spirit, even though it's like I just want some validation every once in a while.
Right.
So that's why it's nice to be here talking to you and having people listen to me, because that
Yeah.
feels like a validation of some kind.
Yeah. You have an attic there you can go to, or
Oh, it's a basement garage. Yeah. I think I
like
usually
an
end
attic?
up in basements. Um, that's kind of where I land, I guess. I don't know. Are you familiar with, there's this French philosopher, Gaston Bachelard, who wrote The Poetics of Space,
Mm-mm.
which is, I'm not a well-read person, but he wrote this book that every artist who paints perceptually of spaces, who paint, like if you ever paint domestic architecture, you have to read this book as a part of an art project. And so he talks about the different areas of the home and how they reflect different components of the personality of the home. And so like the attic is the headspace, and the basement is where the secrets and the roots are, and like
Mm,
windows, you know, it's like all the kind of normal metaphorical things that we're sort of used to at this point. Um,
right.
and so yeah, I don't know what I look for in the basement. It just seems like the comfortable place to be for myself, I guess.
Interesting. I'll have to read that book, and then, maybe we can have an analysis.
Sure, it's a really hard book to read. It took me like 3 months to read that book, but
There is this interesting, I think, as you're talking about space, right? Like there is this, especially I think with art, with visual art, there's a lot of relationship with space, right? Even how work is hung in a gallery or a museum, like the curation of it, the
mhm.
conversation it has with other pieces around it. And then I'm even thinking like, what does this look like in the future? And this, I mean, with art being shown virtually now, yes, there's that platform which can reach probably a broader audience. Um, but then there's also this question of like, what about site specificity? What about the kind of artwork that requires the physical environment to sort of be part of it or to have that conversation? And just what does that look like now? And what is that going to look like, if we continue to have some level of like limitation. Yeah, so that just sort of when you were talking about space, it just that thought also sort of came into my head.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, that is an interesting question. Well, like the New York Gallery is a unique place where an opening night is notorious for being unable to actually view the artwork,
yes, yep,
because the space is full of people, and
right,
so you're not really there to see the work. You're there to see the people, and then
right.
people, as a viewer, you come back another time when there's no people in the gallery. Um, so I think the opening system might just be different in the
Mm-hmm,
future, where maybe there's like a staggered opening or something like that. But
mm-hmm,
even currently, I've been seeing a lot of pictures of people that are doing storefront installations,
mm-hmm,
and
yeah,
I think that's such a cool idea. So that it's a artwork that you can view from the outside without
mm-hmm,
having to enter a space, but you still get to have a tangible interaction with the work.
right,
You can't see it, you can't smell it or touch it or anything like that, but you at least
right,
get a sense of scale and surface and things like that.
yeah,
Which, I mean, the idea of technology and viewing art is something we've been talking about as artists for as long as I've been painting, really. And it's even more so in the last few years with Instagram and
mm-hmm,
yeah. And I remember in grad school I was in Indiana, and there's this YouTuber James Calm, who would he was sort of this like guerrilla videographer that would just run into openings and sort of mutter into the camera. He's like, "That's Jerry Saltz over there. Oh my gosh!" And then Dana Schutz is viewing that, and he's like talking about who's in the gallery, but also showing all the work. And I watched him obsessively as a grad student because I couldn't get to New York and I couldn't see the shows, but he would be
right,
posting these the next day after openings, and so it was kind of as good of an experience as I could get viewing artwork. And he would get really close and then he would back off and sort of give you a slight interpretation of it, but not so much that you felt like you were viewing it through his eyes.
right,
So, um, and I'm always aware of how I can bring people into my own studio through technology. So I think it's just another tool that I think can also do some damage. And I think you have to know how to wield the power.
Right. Yeah.
But it'll never replace having a painting in a room, being able to look at it for hours or days or years at a time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so
Yeah. It's
I don't
true.
know. I miss going to museums. I mean, I was heartbroken when the Met closed in March, and um, I don't know who gets to go look at those paintings now. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm sure somebody's there.
I miss that too. Like just going to the museum and being able to just be there, physically be there, and go decide which works you want to look at, which wing you want to go to. That sort of choice.
Yeah.
We actually have a couple questions
Oh yeah. I've been
from
trying
the
to
audience.
pay
I'm going to
attention to
ask
you.
you. One of them is, what is the painting in the background? What's the
Oh,
painting in your background?
which one?
I
This
think I'm
one?
going to guess the one right. Oh, I guess you could talk about both of them.
These are I brought these out with me, and I think this one's kind of done. Can you see
Oh
that?
yeah, I love that.
Um,
That's beautiful.
yeah, so that's one there. This is actually a gate that I painted in another painting, but I think it has a totally different feeling in this painting.
Mm.
Um, we've since moved to a new apartment, but my old apartment in Crown Heights, um, you couldn't actually see the sky from the window.
Mm.
So in the morning, I would drink my coffee looking at the brick wall across the courtyard from me and sort of pretend that the sun was rising by watching the light move across the brick.
Hmm.
And so I was interested in making paintings of like sunset without including the sky.
Yeah.
Um, and So that's kind of what these are. These are sort of my like sunset paintings um, without
Beautiful.
sky.
Yeah.
I have my friend Pete Makala joined in, and he saw these paintings in person a while back before everything closed down, and he turned his chair around. He refused to look at him. So I hope he's looking right now. But just because he said he didn't want to be locked in a cage um, without a way out, which is
Right.
kind of it's there. Another artist that I've been kind of interested in recently, Abe Storer, um, and he's been painting gates in front of the landscape recently also, and we haven't had any substantial conversation, but we've been sort of commenting back and forth about the world has sort of become our painting environment of this sort of like stuck in a space and isolated and forced to kind of observe your container in a
Yeah.
way, and try to make it as beautiful as possible. So I don't know. Every painting that I make is a little bit different, and I think is about something else. But sort of as a general whole, they're I feel like they're often about being isolated or
Yeah.
separated from another space, and then those objects in the painting can be a metaphorical fill-in for any number of two-party relationships.
Hmm.
And so it's just something I find myself ruminating on, and so I'm fascinated by how the format of the painting can be so emotional and kind of interpersonal, but also like an abstraction at the same time.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, Something that's about geometry or color or something like that. Um, yeah, there's
Yeah.
one. Let me see if I can reach this. Here's one that's not done. I glazed it all up like a week or two ago and got mad
Hmm.
at it, and I've put it in timeout. So this is one that I'm sort of in the middle of. There's one I put dots on it. I've never put dots on the. I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah.
Um,
That's
which
interesting. What made you decide to do that?
I don't know. I just did it. So like maybe that's a part of. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have anything to lose. There's also something about like being away from my studio, I'm not looking at any of my old paintings. So I'm not trying to match anything. And so,
Right.
so some of the decisions I'm making are more intuitive and less like informed
Yeah.
from previous things, which I've heard. I kind of like to have everything out all the time and just sort of be overwhelmed with visual things. But having such a spare selection of my work around me has sort of affected my decisions. Like I feel like they're a little fresher in a way, which is kind of fun. So like, and then I'm always working on these little, I brought a bunch of these little things with me. I get that in the light.
Okay.
So like, that's
Yeah.
kind of a mini of this one up here.
Yeah.
Oh, I can do this. Hang
Ooh.
on. There we go. So
Oh, look at that.
yeah. But really they're different sizes. So, and then I've been, back in my studio, I've been framing these little ones out of cast frames. Like 9 months ago, I bought a bunch of casting material from the Complete Sculptor. They always tell me to shout them out, in Midtown. And so I blew a bunch of money learning how to cast things. And so I've been casting these plastic frames for the paintings. And all the ones that are finished and framed are posted on my Instagram. So
Okay.
people can look at them there.
Nice.
Um,
Thanks.
yeah.
I got another question for you.
Oh yeah, please.
Do you have a specific medium that you prefer to work with over others, a particular paint style method?
Yeah, I'm painting mostly with oil paint. I kind of start everything in acrylic, but the oil paint has been my weapon of choice for about 4 years. Before that, I was exclusively an acrylic painter for about 6 years. Um, yeah, I switched over to acrylic in grad school, for a variety of reasons. Just helped my process progress. And then I changed a few things when I moved to New York, and I just needed to start using oil paint again.
Mm-hmm.
Technique wise, I don't really have a word for anything. I think that they're contemporary. I use a lot of small brushes, these like small nylon brushes. So I've been trying to keep things as like smooth and opaque as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And but recently I've been playing around with kind of more layering effects and things like that, which I think are actually a part of working scenic. So doing like scenic work for TV has really changed some of my approaches in the studio. So yeah, because I'm dealing with similar textures on TV sets, like painting backgrounds of like brick and aged materials and things like that. And then that's when I'm painting in the studio, but
Yeah.
trying to do it in a more refined way. Yeah.
I got a question here from Brian Kelly Art when you're talking about the reclusive
Oh,
painters. Do
uh-huh.
you feel there are essentially basement or attic painters?
I think there's a whole range of those things. No, I don't know. That's an interesting, I'd have to think more about that. There was, um, one of the professors that I encountered in grad school at Indiana University, Barry Gelt. He talked about how there were two kinds of painters. There were night painters and day painters, and there was an obvious shift change in our studio space. Like there was sort of like half of us came in around like 8 or 9 in the morning and left around 6 or 7, and then the rest came in at like late afternoon and they would stay all night. So, and the work that we made reflected that position to the daytime hours. So like I pretty much still adhere to that. I really don't like painting at night. And and that teacher described it as like a person who was more concerned with the outward, the exterior world, the observable world. And then the night painter was like the more interior painter, the person that worked. Brian said Barry is a barn painter. I think he is a barn painter. But yeah, I don't. Locations of making paintings, I think, is interesting. It may not be as. I don't know if you can create quite a conclusion out of where a person paints, but headspace wise, yeah. Maybe a more stubborn person paints in the basement. I don't know.
And then we have one more question. Um, can you show us one of your hydrangeas paintings?
Oh, you know what? I don't have any of those here. Um, that this one technically has a hydrangea in it, but it's kind of not. It's not a part of it at all. Yeah. Uh, I don't know who the the person
Um,
that wants to know if they want to. I can send them details of an image or something if they want to see it. But
okay.
um,
Are there like on your website or Instagram or
there
something?
there might be some details on Instagram. If somebody emails me and wants more images, I can send them some big
Okay.
images. Yeah, for sure. I'm happy to
Yeah,
do
I
that.
can give you the contact information.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I think we're gonna wrap it up in a little bit, but I want to
Cool.
end like kind of on an up note.
Sure.
And I, not that it's been down at all, even if you are a basement painter, I guess. But it's been so fun to just catch up with you and see you and get to talk a little bit more
Yeah,
about what you're
definitely.
doing. Um, but I'm wondering if you just sort of as an ending note can share a little bit about what are you hoping for during this time, or what does hope look like to you right now?
That's an interesting question. I think hoping for normalcy is out of the question. Uh, what does it look like? Huh. That's hard.
It's a hard question.
I don't think I've been thinking about hope very much, to be totally honest.
Yeah, that's
Um,
fine.
uh, yeah, I mean, I think that hoping for life to continue and to move back to a more kind of socially or a social experience, I think would be great. Um, and hoping for less anxiety
Hmm.
in the future for sure.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, hoping that personally, I hope that I can have more opportunities to develop my art career. And then, oh, here we go. Now these are all starting to link up. So then, and also hoping that something new would come from this
Mm.
for the art world. I'm interested in the conversation that's happening around income disparities and
Yeah.
minority neighborhoods and things like that being impacted. And then there's also some murmuring from artists about sort of equalizing the playing field a little bit.
Yeah.
Um, and so I'm hopeful for that to have an impact in some way.
Yeah.
So we'll see what happens with that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's great. I think those are good things to hope for, that, through this, and I resonate with what you're saying, it's really heartbreaking to see the disparities and the existing inequalities that have been further like deepened, by this pandemic. And so I would share in that hope too, that through this we would learn, we would remember what we've learned, and that we would do what we can with what we have, to make it better,
definitely.
to make it a better world, to make better decisions for the future, to make better opportunities for equity, and to just remember what we've learned, that we don't forget, next year or a few years from now. As
Definitely. Yeah.
human beings often do. We're very forgetful creatures. But, well, thank you so much, Ben. It's really good to see you. Thank you so much for
Thanks, Eva. You
sharing
too. Yeah.
thoughts and
Thanks for
what
the
you've been working
opportunity.
on. This is really fun. And I hope you and your family stay safe and you stay sane and you get
Yes.
the alone time you need to process and to create. And hopefully we'll see you back in New York soon.
Sounds great. Thank you so
All
much.
right.
Thanks
Take
everybody
care.
for listening and
Thanks,
watching.
everyone. Have a great